The Guardian is reporting on a fascinating story coming out of Puerto Rico. Politicians and regulators there are currently considering a law that would brand the parents of fat kids as child abusers. That seems a little strong. Under the proposal, parents can be fined up to $800 for having fat kids. They say, quote, "What many families see as a cultural issue, others consider a national health crisis, supported by statistics from recent studies that show rates of childhood obesity in the island running anywhere from 24% to 30%. That compares to an average of 17% across the U.S., so they're even more than us, and we're up there." This is according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Such figures prompted Senator Gilberto Rodriguez Valley, who's one of Puerto Rico's youngest and most popular politicians, to introduce the contentious bill, which seeks to create a healthy child program, as they call it. They say if the bill becomes law, obese children would be identified in schools and their families educated about the health risks and consequences of remaining overweight. So again, I think the most important part of the bill, though, to remember, you can be fined up to $800 for having fat kids, and you would be branded as a child abuser if you did so. So what do you do about this? What do you do about the issue of obesity in general? Well, reading this story reminded me of Bloomberg's ban on big gulps, where he thought, like, oh, this is a great idea for me to try to stop people from being fat, ban the big gulps. Now, there were a trillion loopholes because you could just buy two smaller ones that equaled the size of the big gulp. It also only applied to places regulated by the city, and there were a lot of places in New York City that were regulated not by the city, but either by the state or the federal government. So there, you could end up going to one place where there's a ban and next door there's not a ban. So there were all these different problems with it. And it was ineffectual, and it's also nanny state-ish in a bad way. Like, there's sometimes, I think, a big government, so to speak, makes sense, but in other areas it doesn't make sense. This was an area where it was just, Bloomberg imposing too much of just his opinion on other people without really good reason. Now, I'm not saying that there's not an issue with obesity. I mean, if you listen to health experts, they'll tell you that there is, and I believe them. They have no reason to lie. They have no reason to make it up, and I think they're genuinely concerned about healthcare costs and health issues with individuals and things like that, and I think that's totally fine to be concerned about that and to try to address it. But to do it the way Bloomberg did, I don't think makes any sense, and by the same token, I don't think it makes any sense in Puerto Rico either to do this. Because face it, they're not abusing their children if their kids are obese, because so many factors go into obesity. It's not just this simplistic view of like, don't eat so much, but there are a trillion things that go into it. So poverty goes into it, the kind of food you can afford goes into it, the kind of food that's available goes into it, what your genetics are and what your biology is definitely goes into it. Some people can eat like crazy all day long and never get fat. Some people eat not all that much and they still blow up. So there's so many things that go into it that to view it in this simplistic way is disrespectful to the issue itself, the real issue that we're facing. So I wouldn't be in favor of what they're doing here. I think this goes way too far. And it is treating something that's more of a health issue like it's a criminal issue, right? Like if somebody had some sort of psychological issue, let's say, would you fine them? Would you push them further into poverty? No, that doesn't make sense. You would address it in a more sympathetic way. So what I would do is, instead, I would focus on labeling issues. I think that's one that's important and almost a no-brainer, where everything should be labeled. Even GMOs, which you guys know I've given you evidence to suggest that there's no reason to fearmonger over them, but do I think they should be labeled? Yes, you should label them. Everybody should know what they're eating. I think that makes perfect sense. You should have healthy foods in school. I also agree with that. Like, if you want to bring in pizza and McDonald's, whatever, I'm not going to ban you from doing that, but should it be available there that the food you get is healthy? Yes, I do think that makes sense, and I do think that's the right thing to do, because that's the government itself literally providing food, and why should the government contribute to the culture of obesity? Basic regulation that bans unnecessary and unsafe fattening food additives, too, I would be in favor of. So, like, trans fats, they've now... been the target of some legislation. And it makes sense because there are things that you could do to not have trans fats to keep the taste of different things the same. And the different things that people use are healthier and they won't lead to obesity and they're just better overall. So yeah, I'm for regulation in that sense too. So are there little things the government can do here and there to like tweak around the edges to do some regulation to kind of lead the country in the right direction? Yes, I'm in favor of that. But I'm never in favor of like going too far and doing outright bans of certain things or fining people or labeling people child abusers or jacking up their rates for overweight people for their health insurance. I think that's where you go too far, and that's where you're not really addressing the problem as much as you're just discriminating.